on 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 2. And it's often said that the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 2. I'll give you a few moments to get there. Okay, so which reads, "For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted. In the day of salvation I have succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." All right, so this verse is actually quoting an Old Testament verse, which is Isaiah chapter 49, and that's also in verse 8. I'm going to read that for you just for comparison also. "Thus saith the Lord, in an acceptable time I have heard thee, and in a day of salvation I have helped thee. And I will preserve thee and give thee for a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, and to cause to inherit the desolate heritages." All right, so what we're talking about is today is the day of salvation.
Can you put it up on the screen?
No, I don't have anything prepared for that. Put it up on the screen. Unless there's a Bible program for that.
Can you reread it again?
Yeah, I can read it again. So it's 2 Corinthians, and it's chapter 6, verse 2. And it says, "For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted. In the day of salvation I have succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation."
Yeah.
So today is the day of salvation. There's no better time to receive Christ than today. But it's not, salvation is not just spiritual salvation. Salvation is for anything that you need God to be. God is the great I am. And in the Old Testament passage that we just read, in Isaiah 49, what he's referring to there is inheriting the promises that God gave to the Israelites, that they would go into the promised land and receive an inheritance from the Lord. So it's more than just salvation. It's also, if you're in poor health and you need healing, then you can be saved that way as well. So I'm just going to read some other verses that are related to that. So in Isaiah 61, it talks about the acceptable year of the Lord. So if you want to turn real quickly.
What words in 61?
It's Isaiah 61, verse 2. And this is Isaiah 61
2
and verse 2. So this is another Old Testament quote that was also reiterated in the New Testament, and we'll get to that. So if you want to turn there, that's Isaiah 49 and verse 8. I think we just read that already. So it's
49 verse 8?
No, I'm sorry. I just repeated myself. We're going to look at Isaiah 61, verse 2. Okay. And this is what Jesus quoted when he began his ministry. He opened the scroll of Isaiah to this passage, all right, which reads in Isaiah 61, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." And he stops right there. He does not continue reading the rest of it, because the rest of it talks about the day of vengeance of our God, which is a day yet to come. So when Jesus comes back, he's not going to come back as a gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He's not going to come as a suffering servant. He's going to come as a conquering king. So that's why now is the acceptable time, because it's going to be too late then. You can't say, oh, Lord, I believed in you. But if you believe, then you should have received them when you had the time to. So now is the accepted time, and now is the day of salvation. So if you haven't received Christ, it's getting late in the game, people. So it's time to receive the Lord. All right, so also, so anyways, that was Luke, also Luke chapter 4, verses 19. We don't really need to go there because I just quoted it. He was reading from Isaiah 61. But also in Luke chapter 19, and also in verse 42 and 44, let's go there though. I want to save time. I don't want to read the passage in Luke 4:19 over again. All right, so we're going to look at Luke 19, verses 42 to 44. So we're going to look at it real quick. Or it's 42 for 44. All right, so okay, that verse reads, saying, "If thou hadst known, even then at the least in this thy day, the things which belong to thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come when thy enemies will cast a trench about thee, encompass thee round about, keep thee on every side. And thou shalt lay even with the ground, and thy children with thee, and shall not leave thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the day of thy salvation." So what Jesus is saying there is that the Jews had their acceptable day of the Lord to receive Christ as their Messiah and as their King. But because they did not recognize the times that they were in, they missed it. So, which is actually good for us, because then the gospel was preached to the Gentiles, and we were able to receive Christ. And then the church was formed. So Israel was kind of put on the back burner for a little while. They're going to have their day in the future, but they missed the acceptable day of the Lord. That's why it's very important that today, if you hear the voice of the Lord, to receive Him today. So, and now we're going to look at Hebrews, and then I'll conclude with that. So there's a couple of passages in Hebrews. We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 3, verses 7 and 13. All right, so Hebrews chapter 3, verses 7 says, "Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today, if ye hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me and proved me, and saw my works for 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved that that generation said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways." And what this is referring to is that when the 12 spies went to spy out the land, only 2 of them gave a good report, and the other 10 gave a bad report of the land. And so they weren't able to enter the land at that time. So they missed the boat. They missed the acceptable day of the Lord because they did not receive in faith that the Lord was going to give them the land. They were scared of the giants that were in the land, and they said, "We are not able." Well, when you're not able, that means it's a God-sized job. And God fully intended to bring them into the promised land, but they just did not have faith to believe it. So you need to receive and believe in faith the promises of God in order to receive the promises of God. All right, so the next passage is also in Hebrews. That's chapter 4, and that's verse 7 also. So again, he limited a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, that it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. For if Jesus had given them rest, then he would not afterwards have spoken of another day. So, therefore, there remaineth a rest unto the people of God. And that rest is resting in faith in the promises of God, and standing on the promises of God, and taking it to the bank and cashing that check. All right, well, that concludes my message. Thank you for your attention.